Welcome back, dear brothers and sisters, for the final presentation of the day. And we have with us Reverend Dr. Shabu Joseph, SDB, Principal of Christojoti College. His theme is Pauline Ecology against the background of Laudate Deum. Along with him, I also welcome the moderator, Reverend Dr. Jeevan Prasad. Father Jeevan Prasad belongs to the MSFS congregation. He completed his licentiate and doctorate from the prestigious Catholic University Leuven, Belgium. His doctoral thesis focuses on the subject, the theological concept of hope in the first epistle to the Thessalonians. Presently, he is the prefect of studies at the Indian Institute of Spirituality, Rajajinagar. He worked as the executive director of Pastoral Society Institute, a non-governmental organization for empowering children, women and farmers, and a training center for volunteers of catechetical, pastoral and social work. Welcome, dear fathers.
Dear fathers, sisters, all invited guests, welcome back once again to the National Bible Symposium. The last session number 6, we have an important speaker with us, that is Reverend Dr. Shabu Joseph, belongs to the Society of Don Bosco. Father is the principal of Christojoti College in Bangalore and is well versed and a scholar in the Old Testament, and he has been teaching for many years there. And today he will be presenting the paper, The Encounter Between Jesus and the Samaritan Woman in John 4:1-42, a movement towards sincere dialogue and mutual integration. So like a paucity of time, I now invite Father to immediately begin the presentations. Hearty welcome, Father, and all the best. Yes.
Good afternoon, friends. Right at the outset, I must confess that it's neither my love for John nor for Paul that I find myself here. It's merely my love, respect, and gratitude to my friend, Father Assisi Saldana, that has brought me here, and I pay my deep respect to him. Father Assisi, best wishes. Today's session coincides with the feast of the conversion of St. Paul, a man whose encounter with Jesus transformed his life and changed the course of the history of the world. During this presentation, I'd like to highlight another encounter with Jesus that has been the topic of discussion right from the beginning of the inception of this narrative. Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan woman is one of the most symbolically loaded and perplexing episodes of the New Testament. From tomes of exegetical studies to handbooks of spirituality, this encounter has surely captured the attention of many. This episode is a prime example of Johnine narration. Organized dramatically, the narration synthesizes the theology of John, not only from the Christological and the ecclesiological points of view, but also from perspectives of sincere dialogue, the results in mutual acceptance, and the process with which one enters into genuine relationship. The relevance of the theme, I think if you were to situate the situation of our nation today, something that of conflict and division. In the context of the dedication of the Ram temple in Ayodhya that took place on the 22nd of this month, which was highly controversial in India, and that has resulted in division among different sections of the society. And this division primarily arose from differing perspectives on the historical and religious significance of the site. The inauguration of this mandir in Ayodhya has intensified the divide in Indian politics, with its implications resonating through the upcoming elections, minority communities' sentiments, and the nation's secular ethos. Besides the religious, legal, historical, and the political divide, its social divide has strained intercommunity relationships, leading to increased mistrust and animosity among people. Incident like this has further polarized the society along religious, legal, political, and social lines, resulting in division and creating challenges for communal harmony in India. And now, this episode of the Samaritan woman is an example of how a dialogue can break barriers established on the basis of race, religion, and gender. In the course of their conversation, Jesus succeeds in overcoming the obstacle of the controversies between Jews and Samaritans by expounding the faith he brings. Thus, by the end of the dialogue, the Samaritan woman expresses her belief in Jesus and alerts her fellow Samaritans that the Messiah has come. Afterwards, Jesus remains among the Samaritans for 2 days, and many of them come to believe in him. As Father John P. Meyer has rightly stressed, John 4:42 is the most explicit and well-informed passage about Samaritans in the New Testament. The text addresses the historical conflict that existed between the Jews and the Samaritans and shows how Jesus considered overcoming it an urgent task and worked towards making it less of a stumbling block to the manifestation of the Messiahship. We shall begin by reviewing the basic religious and theological differences between the Samaritans and the Jews as background study, because I know there are also BTH and MTH students sitting down here. The Samaritan-Jew relationship. Relations between the Samaritans and the Jews were complex and thorny before and during the time of Jesus. The Samaritans are the people said to have inhabited Samaria in the northern kingdom of Israel. Samaria was located in the New Testament times between Galilee in the north and Judea in the south. However, Samaritans associate their names over and against the geographical labeling with the term Samarim, the keeper of the law. Josephus, however, sustains that the label Samaritan is Greek. The Samaritans sustain that they are descendants of the Israelites of the northern kingdom from the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, who survived the Assyrian destruction of Samaria and the deportation in 722 BC. The Jewish version in 2 Kings 17 describes the Samaritans as the descendants of foreigners brought by the Assyrian king Shalmaneser to settle in the region of Samaria as replacements for the northern Israelites deported to Assyria. A more objective view on the origin of the Samaritans implies that they are predominantly offsprings of intermarriages between the northern Israelites who survived the Assyrian deportation of 722 BC and foreign deportees from the Mesopotamian regions. Now, a small summary of the basic religious and theological differences. The basic religious and theological differences between the Samaritans and the Jews can be summarized thus. The Samaritans do not recognize Jerusalem temple as the proper place for the worship of Yahweh. They insist that it was at Gerizim that Joshua built the first tabernacle when Israel entered Palestine, and Gerizim remained the center of all Israelite worship until the renegade priest Eli set up a rival sanctuary at Shiloh, creating, of course, 2 sanctuaries and 2 priesthoods. Therefore, they see Judaism as an extension of the heresy of Eli through Samuel, Saul, David, the Judean monarchy, and Ezra, with rival cult moving from Shiloh the first venue for the illegality or counterfeit sanctuary to Jerusalem. And they pride themselves as the preservers of the authentic ancient Israelite faith traceable to the pre-monarchical practice at Shechem. The Jews, on the other hand, regard Samaritanism as a heresy derived from the corrupt worship of Yahweh mixed up with the worship of the foreign gods brought into Samaria by the foreign settlers during the Assyrian deportation. The Samaritans claim to be more faithful observers of the Torah and in possession of the more authentic wordings of the Torah against the unadulterated versions of the Jews. I'd like to recall an incident, Father Joy was here yesterday, Father Joy Kakinat. As part of our study, we went to the synagogue in Samaria several years ago, and we on the Sabbath day, and we were taken to the synagogue, and the high priest told us, see, we will give you a surprise. We have the oldest book in the Bible, the original book given to us by Moses. And since you are the disciples of Jesus, who gave water to our great-great-great-grandmother, we will allow you to touch. So with great devotion, we touched the Pentateuch, the scroll. And of course, it was a moving experience for us, So they think they are the real inheritors and they have the original Torah. So it is in this background that the conversation between the two takes place. In spite of the differences, it is to be noted that the Samaritans are Israelites and with the Jews worship Yahweh, regard the Pentateuch as sacred and observe the Torah. Like in Judaism, they believe in the coming of the Messiah as expressed in John 4:25, identified as the restorer, a prophet linked to the tribe of Levi based on Deuteronomy 18:15. So two groups are brothers and worshippers of the same Yahweh, but with the walls of bitterness erected on both sides, Samaritans and Jews make it evident that it is not the person from the radically different culture on the other side of the world that is hardest to love, but the nearby neighbor who has got a lot of differences. The third point, John 4:1-42 as a dialogue, which is a theme of our topic. So this 4:1-42 is a combination of narratives and discourses which involve principally Jesus and the Samaritan woman, Jesus and his disciples, Samaritan woman and her co-Samaritans of Sychar, and finally Jesus and the Samaritans in general. So there are a number of dialogues going on there. And the first is a dialogue on living water and the estrangement between Samaritans and the Jews, 7b-15. So Jesus is located in a Samaritan town as he journeys towards Galilee, while strict Jews like the Pharisees preferred the longer route up the Jordan Valley through the Bethshean Gap in order to avoid contact with any Samaritan town. The impersonal verb they in verse 4 implies the divine necessity associated with the mission of Jesus, and thus underscores the inevitability of Jesus' journey through Samaria. And the first request is, give me a drink. At the end of the geographical details, Jesus is described in section 7b-15 as wearied and therefore in need of assistance. The request of a Samaritan woman for water is an acknowledgement of the fact that though an adversary, the Samaritan possesses that which Jesus, a Jew on the other camp, necessarily requires, but may not get if their differences are not overcome. This gesture thus becomes on the part of Jesus as a Jew an overcoming of the human-made barrier to acquire the most essential element of life which supersedes the divide in value, and an overture of which engages the woman, places her in a privileged position to offer that which her rival is in dire need of. It turns her into an interlocutor by offering her an opportunity to express herself in a manner that reveals her prejudices as a Samaritan and that of Jesus as a Jew. It is unacceptable for Jews to speak with or have dealings with Samaritans on the one hand, and on the other hand, public conversations with with women were under strict rabbinic regulations. The action of Jesus thus becomes an invitation for a dialogue and goes contrary to two socio-religious divides of his time. Next title is If You Knew the Gift of God. That's the reply of Jesus. The emphatic you, if you knew the gift of God, used of the woman implies that the divide has made it impossible for the Samaritan to recognize the gift of God, the possessor of the gift and dispenser of the living water that procures eternal life, which the faith of both communities look forward to. Ordinarily, the term living water would mean fresh running water or life-giving water. The second is implied here. Okay, go to the next one. Are you greater than Jacob? So there is a convergence here. The introduction of her question with the interrogative may implies a negative response and reflects another Johannine irony, which in the knowledge of the evangelist and of his readers means a confession that Jesus is greater than Jacob and is the true well of Israel. The comparison with the patriarch Jacob, which come from Jews and the Samaritans respectively, equally prove the common heritage, which is important for a dialogue. The common heritage of the two communities for which their division appears absurd. The superiority of Jesus is further elaborated in the contrast between the water from the well of Jacob and the water Jesus gives. Then he says, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst. The insistent engagement in dialogue thus gradually lowers the wall of the schism and reveals to the woman that she too is in need and must be ready to make a request by overcoming the division if she must satisfy her needs. It turns the woman who was initially the possessor into the person in need and thus provides her with the impetus and humility to make a genuine request. She becomes the enthusiastic needy who is not equally shy to break social and religious conventions by in turn asking to be given the living water. It proves the reciprocity of human existence and the fact that humankind needs the other. Entering into a relationship is imperative if existence must be realized. The next one, the dialogue on the authentic place of worship, because this is the crux interpretum, the key passage of the text and the basis for the newfound role of the Samaritan woman in the enhancement of a dialogue between Jesus and the Samaritans. The woman introduces the very controversial theological subject, which stands at the basis of the division between Samaritanism and Judaism about the mount of worship. The phrase "this mountain" refers to Mount Gerizim. It raises the question of the genuine place of worship. Is it Mount Gerizim where the Samaritan shrine is located, or Jerusalem where the temple is? The preposition recalls the squabbles about rebuilding the Jerusalem temple at the return of the people of Judah from the Babylonian exile, the destruction of the Samaritan temple in 128 BC by John Hyrcanus, the Jewish ruler, and the desecration of the Jerusalem temple in AD 6 by the Samaritans. These were events which initiated and deepened the religious schism between two groups. Due to lack of time, I go to the now of the Messiah and the spiritual worship. And I go to the conclusion. The anticipated change in conventional worship defined by place in verse 21 has come in the eschatological present, where true worship is no longer about place as it was misconceived, but about God as spirit. Consequently, worship must take place in spirit and in truth. The conflict about worship site is influenced by the concept of a God who is localized and confined to a particular place and people, but the hour of the Messiah outdoes this by the new worship, which is a spiritual share in the God who is present to all. The and now is of the hour, which Jesus pronounces in verse 23, is an inbreaking of the eschatological future, which transforms the ordinary present into an eschatological present. It speaks of Jesus no longer as a prophet, but as a Messiah. The woman's observation about the Messiah reflects the traditional Jewish and Samaritan eschatological expectation of the Messiah. The convergence. The woman's response to this apparently still uncertain revelation is a return to her hometown as witness, through whom that which was originally impossible becomes possible. The Samaritans come to meet Jesus and invite him to remain with them. You know that staying with means to enter into a relationship with and interact with him. The 2 days of Jesus' stay with the Samaritans imply further dialogue and the breaking of the wall of division. Her mission to the town brings the townspeople to Jesus so that the social barrier is finally broken and the gospel is brought to the Samaritans. They accept that salvation comes from the Jews in the person of Jesus and makes a Christological confession by acknowledging Jesus as the Savior of the world. Thus, the woman becomes the first apostle to the Samaritans. Just as the first disciples, she left her things and went to announce the news, having thought she had discovered the Christ. It is a climax or culmination of the progressive revelation of Jesus to the Samaritan woman, on which the Samaritans becomes convinced and confess their belief in him as the Messiah and thus accept salvation as coming from the Jews. The progressive revelation, which started first as a mendicant, boastful Jew, greater than Jacob and a prophet, now arrives at Jesus' identification as the Messiah. Now, some points for the interreligious models of dialogue. First, uniqueness of the parties. It is pertinent to acknowledge areas of differences, the distinctiveness of the parties, and not understand dialogue as attempt to win the other over. Rather, an effort to acknowledge and respect the position of the other. Since dialogue cannot take place in a vacuum, there must be a taking of position. These are precisely the implications of the observation of the woman in the dialogue regarding the social divide and the disagreement about place of worship. So they are equally in the implications of the consequent replies of Jesus, for which he insists on the veracity of the Jewish worship and the Jews being in possession of the prerogative of salvation. Second, the imperative of dialogue. Dialogue is one word that has constituted and enriched the global dictionary. It has shaped the world we live in today and has reduced the frequency of conflicts and wars. And the last part of that, what Hinz describes as the ability to express criticism without sowing bitterness, which can be a sign and test of the mutual trust established in dialogue. This is the meaning of the time spent between Jesus and the Samaritan woman, and above all, the consensual invitation to stay with the Samaritans. And dialogue as proclamation. This is mainly for ecumenism. The dialogue finally turned into evangelization. Jesus evangelized the Samaritan woman, and she later on evangelized her community. So to conclude, I'd like to highlight a few points. First, breaking social and cultural barriers. In the story, Jesus, a Jewish man, engages in a conversation with a Samaritan woman, despite the historical animosity between Jews and Samaritans. By initiating this dialogue, Jesus breaks social and cultural barriers, showing that religious dialogue should transcend these divisions. Second, respectful dialogue across religious differences. The conversation between Jesus and the Samaritan woman is characterized by mutual respect despite their differing religious belief. Jesus listens attentively to the woman's perspective and respectfully addresses her questions and concerns. This demonstrates that religious dialogue should be based on respect and understanding rather than domination or conversion. Third, inclusiveness and personal transformation. Through his interaction with the Samaritan woman, Jesus extends this message of salvation and inclusion to a marginalized person. He recognizes her worth as an individual and offers her the opportunity for spiritual transformation. Fourth, challenge of traditional religious norms. The conversation between Jesus and the Samaritan woman challenges traditional religious norms and boundaries. Jesus criticizes the woman's religious practices, urging her to worship in spirit and in truth, rather than adhering to specific physical locations or rituals. This aspect of the story reminds us that religious dialogue should be open to questioning and re-evaluating existing beliefs and practices in order to foster a deeper understanding of God and spirituality. Finally, witnessing and sharing faith experiences. The Samaritan woman's encounter with Jesus results in a personal spiritual experience that she cannot keep to herself. She goes back to her community, sharing her encounter with Jesus and inviting others to meet him. This aspect of the story illustrates the transformative power of religious dialogue to create curiosity, inspire others, and foster a sense of community. So overall, the story of the Samaritan woman in the Bible serves as a paradigm for this dialogue by highlighting the need to break barriers, show respect, embrace inclusiveness, challenge traditional norms, and share personal faith experiences. Thank you for your patient listening.
Sincere thanks to Dr. Shabu Jacob for giving us a wonderful narrative structure of the encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. Father began to explain the social divide or barriers that we experience in the present context in reference to Ayodhya, which is very recent fresh in our memory. And then he went back to the Samaritan context, the composition of the community, and later how in a spiral way the successive dialogues reveal about Jesus' own identity, and then how woman becomes a witnessing person towards the end. So we have seen how the divine necessity explained through the material need of Jesus wanting to have a drink, and later we find that this role has been reversed, where Jesus becomes the provider of the living water and woman becomes the receiver. So this is a kind of transformative spiral or cycle or successive progression that we see in the Samaritan text, and then how certain models can be derived for interreligious and ecumenical dialogue based on mutual respect and critical approach to traditional norms of faith, and then also giving what we call prominence to the personal value of the witnessing, as well as becoming a model community in the present context. Dear Father, we thank you for enlightening us on this aspect, and I'm told that due to paucity of time, there won't be interactions for this talk or for the entire day. We would be moving directly into the final activity of the session, that is felicitation of Reverend Dr. Professor Assisi Saldana. So over to the organizers.